It's not a place I normally would want to be, but we've had discussions backstage, you see. We want to be like real people. You know, like talk, talk and sort of show who we are. That's gone against about 50 years in the music business where I didn't want anyone to know what I'm really like. You know, it seems to be best to keep quiet. But anyway, the guys have won the argument, so I'm here. And first of all, I must tell you, I may have told you, I don't know how many of you were here last year or 2 years ago. Yes. Okay, well, so I can't tell the same joke then. I'm serious. Anyway, I'm a Swedish resident now, you may be interested to know. You're supposed to cheer, but you don't have to. And there's a joke that I read was a Swedish joke. So it's to your credit that you told this joke about yourselves, but if you didn't, I've been telling it for quite a long time about what are Swedes like. I said, well, when COVID came, the government said you should stay 1.5 meters away from each other in the supermarket. And then the Swedes said, but what's wrong with the usual 5? To treat you like grown-ups, I thought I would tell you something about music technology as it's now used on live performance. These things in my ear are not to bring me any external sound or anything like that. It's just so I can hear Mick very clearly. And Steve also uses them, the other guys don't, but sometimes we play in very echoey halls. So this is very, very useful. But what most 90% of the pop acts that you see now performing live are performing live. But you know, if you had, like we at one time, we had an African choir on the record and they're singing one song, you're not going to have an African choir come along to the concert and sing in the corner. So that would already be on tape or on recorded material. If you had 3 organ players or if you had a brass section, you may not carry the brass section. So everybody now plays to a sort of click track or a percussion track where you have to be in time with the computer and it's perfect. So that the sound you can rely on, there's no imperfections, everything is perfect. And we've decided to be imperfect. And, you know, which means that if those of you who are critical, probably hear some cock-ups going on back here. And they happen, but on the other hand, we can sometimes achieve something you couldn't if you got it perfect. But the funny thing is that this is the modern way of doing things. But really it's terribly bad technology that allows it, because what you should be able to do is play like we play, and the computer follows us. But with AI and with everything, no one's yet managed to find out that when a drummer plays and does a drum fill, it'll come back in time. So oddly enough, the technology will one day be very old-fashioned. So I'm going to ask those of you who spoke earlier, did I tell the joke about an old man? I tell old men jokes, now I'm an old man. Walking down a corridor of an old age home asking how old he was?
No.
Okay, so there's an old bloke and he walks down a corridor in a home and he says somebody says, how old do you think I am?
84
Well, it was, did I say that last year or were you just talking about me? I'm talking about me. Oh, that's okay, because that actually has been how old he was, but it wasn't me, honest. You'll find out in a minute, it definitely wasn't me. So he says, well, you look about 75. He says, well, I'm 84. And I said, well, you look good for your age. Very good. He says, thank you very much. And this sounds boring now, but it gets more interesting. And then he sees another bloke and he says, how old do you think I am? He says, you look about 78. He says, I'm 84. He says, well, you look very good for your age. He says, thank you very much. He goes down another corridor and there's a woman in a wheelchair. And there's a friend of mine here in a wheelchair. I'm sorry, Inga, it's not about you. But And he says to this woman, he says, how old do you think I am? And she says, would you mind putting your penis in my hand for a moment? And it's an unusual request. And he feels a bit embarrassed about this. And so and don't worry, I'm not going to do anything, but it's sort of this motion. And she's holding him, and she's stroking, and she's fiddling around and moving, and the guy's embarrassed, he looks this way and that, and it doesn't feel too bad. And, he's doing, it's not unpleasant, but he's embarrassed, he hopes nobody comes around, and this goes on for quite a long time. And then she stops and she looks at him, and she says, you're 84. And he says, but how can you tell from what you've just done? She says, you told me yesterday.